Hi, hi. Jimmy Krotov speaking from Stefantseva, not far from Moscow. For many weeks, I have a sort of discussion, polemics chat with my friend, Russian, who is now in New Zealand, in Christchurch, it seems to me, about whether Western countries had a chance to prevent Putin's invasion to Ukraine. He thinks that there was a chance. For example, to sanction Russia in 21st, before the war. At least half of the sanctions which have been introduced in March could save Ukraine from invasion, should it be promoted beforehand. She thinks that United States and Great Britain were obliged not to get their warships from the Black Sea, and so on and so forth. So to use more force. I think, you see, for many years, actually from the beginning of 90s, for 33 years, I've wrote to the Western people that they don't understand that Russia is still a totalitarian country. They are over-optimistic. They don't want to know that Yeltsin has kept KGB under another title. But Stalin also renamed KGB, was not KGB under Stalin, but it was just the same organization. Its first name was Cheka. And it still remains, this name still remains in the language of the Russian people and of the Russian power, Cheka. That economy of Russia is not free, that there is no complete freedom of press, there was no substantial reforms, and this is still a military country which wages bloody war, although small wars, like in Transnistria, in Moldavia. But the war in Chechnya was not a small war. It was a huge war, and the victims of this war were about 400,000 people, Russians and Chechens both. But these Russians has been killed by the Russian troops because Kremlin waged the war absolutely brutally. I've explained this both to my Western friends and to Russians, because here in Russia, people are over-optimistic. Or better say, Western people thought that it's okay, everything in Russia. It's just the first steps. In Russia, my friends were not over-optimistic, but they've hoped that there is a chance. It was a mistake. There was no chance. In 19, I wrote about the freedom of conscience, first of all, that there is no real freedom of conscience in Russia. I've explained that the ideology of the state and of the Moscow Patriarch is very dangerous, nationalistic, chauvinistic, and so on and so forth. And still Pope met with Moscow Patriarch, it was Riediger at the time, and met with Gundyaev. Now, he also is not against the meeting. Why not? He's a peacemaker. But this is not a peacemaking to meet with Hitler. Could the West make more in 90s? I thought, yes. And I wrote and have spoken because I had a hope that if the West should change its behavior, then the West will help us in Moscow, us I mean a tiny minority of people democratically oriented. Very tiny. Thousands, not tens of thousands. What did I want then in 90s? I remember the movie of BBC about Solzhenitsyn, his return to Russia. Solzhenitsyn make a big show from his trip to Russia in 1992, it seems to me. Not by plane, by train. From States, by train. So he went first of all to Alaska, then by ship to Vladivostok, and then through all Russia, from east to west by train, with BBC journalists recording sorry, his each step. It's very psychologically interesting to look on the computer and to see 0 amount of listeners, views, and amount of likes. 0. And during one stop, somewhere in Siberia, railway station, Solzhenitsyn speaking with big bosses of the small town, and a large crowd which stands, but it is blocked by KGB men. And someone, this crowd cries to Solzhenitsyn, Alexander Isayevich, this man with whom you are speaking, he worked for the KGB. And Solzhenitsyn turned to him and said, well, we must be peacemakers. We must reconcile Russians to save Russia. Later on, Solzhenitsyn supported the war in Chechnya. Solzhenitsyn wrote about Ukraine as a junk state, which must be returned to Russia, and so on and so forth. He was a nationalist, anti-Semitic, and so he was an anti-communist, but he was totalitarian ideologist. I wanted, just like this man from the crowd, for Solzhenitsyn not to speak with these big bosses from the former communist nomenclature. I wanted him to speak with me and with others like me, to take our side, not to take a manor from KGB. They gave him a manor, a large house in the Moscow suburb, which previously belonged to KGB. Before the KGB belonged to some Grand Duke of Russia. There was a lot of Grand Dukes. It was a man of Grand Duke. And this is the same. So when Billy Graham, a Pope, communicated Russians, they communicated people of power. They didn't communicate me. I am too tiny person. And Western politicians communicated big bosses in Kremlin. It was a mistake. Was it an inevitable mistake or not? I am not sure. I must think. Maybe it was inevitable because people of power are obliged to communicate people of power. I am too tiny man, and there was a lot of these tiny men, humans. You cannot communicate all 130 millions of Russian citizens. You must communicate their representative. But Putin or Yeltsin were not our representatives. Petro Alexei was not my representative. He was my oppressor. Maybe it was an inevitable evil. People of power must communicate other people of power. Even one power is democratic, American power is democratic, but American people of power are obliged to communicate Russian people of power, although Russian power is totalitarian one. Funny. Nowadays, I think that West could not prevent invasion to Ukraine in 2021 or 20, because Putin had a plan, and Putin has an atomic bomb. You cannot wage war with the country with atomic bomb. You can invade Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, but not Pakistan or India or Russia or China. In 1948, Nikolai Berdyaev, famous Russian thinker, wrote that atomic bomb killed the war. He was mistaken. He died before the beginning of the Korean War. Atomic bomb killed only the war with the country which possesses the atomic bomb. Iraq. You can wage war with Iraq, but not with Russia or Pakistan. Although Pakistan is not better than Iran towards Israel. But even now, I think that Western politicians, but also simple Western people, are not doing everything to oppose Russia. And I think that sanctions is a big mistake. Just like in Iraq or Iran, sanctions, first of all, destroy the democratic forces inside these countries. Especially it was true for Iraq, but for Iran also. Sanctions are just like atomic bomb. They do not differ who is Democrat, who is totalitarian. So you see, Kremlin blocked Facebook for me. I must use VPN. But when Apple left Russia, this is just the same. They also make harder for me to communicate you and to communicate my Russian friends. So this is just in line with the politics of totalitarianism. My freedom of speech is greatly reduced here. I cannot publish a book. I cannot publish an article in the large press, and so on and so forth. But West doesn't help me to overcome this obstacle. And Western raiders, I dare to say, they are bad. Those which work towards Russians. No, they are a very primitive propaganda. Putin is bad, and so on and so forth. There is no real discussion, better to say. Because they work for the government. And they are bothered not by the truth, by democracy, they are bothered only. What should I write to my big bosses in Washington? Or Berlin, or Paris, no difference. And all these are examples of how power tends to corrupt. The problem is that power's corruption influences more democratic regimes than totalitarian ones. So power tends to corrupt democratic states. You cannot corrupt totalitarian states because totalitarian state has been already corrupted 99%. Yeah, funny. Okay, sorry. Oh, 15 minutes, not so long. By the way, okay, no. Bye.